faithfully delivering value and interpreting great books from around the world. Hello, this is Sally Talks Books. Today I'm going to interpret the book called Twilight of the Gods. From 1944 to 1945, covering the Battle of Leyte Gulf to Japan's surrender. The author is Ian Toll, a lecturer at the U.S. Naval War College and a naval history researcher. In December 1941, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, crippling the U.S. Pacific Fleet. Early in the Pacific War, Japanese forces swept through Southeast Asia, nearly wiping out Western military power in the Asia-Pacific region. It wasn't until 6 months later that the recovering U.S. forces barely won key victories like the battles of Midway, Coral Sea, and Guadalajara, halting Japan's offensive momentum. After that, the U.S. waged a war of attrition, targeting Japanese supply lines to wear them down, while using island-hopping tactics, jumping between Pacific islands to hit weak spots in defenses. By July and August 1944, U.S. forces seized key strongholds like Saipan and Guam. Long-range bombers could now strike Tokyo and the Kanto Industrial Zone, putting Japan's homeland in range. The final showdown was near. This history's been covered by Ian Toll in the first two books of his Pacific War trilogy, The Conquering Tide and The Crucible of War. Detailed descriptions were covered before on Sally Talks Books. Next up, Twilight of the Gods wraps up the trilogy. In this episode, I'll explain how U.S. forces beat Japan through bloody battles, forcing its unconditional surrender. How did World War II come to an end? The book has 16 chapters, totaling 750,000 words. I'll cover this book in two parts. Today's Part 1 has 3 sections. Part 1, the Army-Navy dispute over the main offensive strategy and the Battle of Peleliu. Part 2, mixed reviews on the brilliance and failures of the Battle of Leyte Gulf. Part 3, a bitter victory and capturing Manila and liberating the Philippines. All right, now let's dive into Part 1, the Army-Navy dispute, setting the main offensive direction, and the Battle of Peleliu. From mid-August to mid-September 1944, U.S. forces had no major operations, giving the Pacific theater a rare calm. This was partly because after the bloody fights for Saipan and Guam, U.S. casualties hit about 20,000, needing rest and reinforcements. On the other hand, the top U.S. military brass also needed to determine the next main offensive direction. There were 2 proposals, one by Chief of Naval Operations Ernest King to capture Taiwan Island as a stepping stone for invading mainland Japan. This plan sparked controversy within the Navy. Admiral Chester Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet, noted Taiwan Island was large, had complex terrain, and had been colonized for nearly 50 years. Japan had ample time to build defenses, making it easily defensible. Estimates showed capturing Taiwan would require 500,000 Army troops and 210,000 Navy personnel, a huge strain, while Europe's battles raged. Thus, Nimitz favored seizing Iwo Jima and Okinawa. These islands were south of Japan, closer, and much smaller, making them relatively easier targets. This stance won frontline Navy commanders' support. Ernest King reluctantly accepted, so the Navy proposed a new plan to the Joint Chiefs. First take Iwo Jima, then Okinawa, blockade Japan, and bomb remotely, until its strength faded before invading. However, this plan faced fierce Army opposition. General Douglas MacArthur, South Pacific commander, argued the priority wasn't Iwo Jima, but liberating the Philippines. He cited military and political reasons. First, the military rationale. MacArthur noted his Army forces had captured South Pacific islands with Navy support. As fronts advanced, attacking the Philippines was natural. Logistics and air-sea support were ready. No troops needed from Europe. Plus, highly active Filipino guerrillas would aid U.S. forces. Liberating the Philippines would give the U.S. air and sea control over the Western Pacific, securing Japan's invasion path. Liberating the Philippines also had major political significance. Though a former U.S. colony, America had promised Philippine independence pre-war, interrupted by Japan's invasion. Thus, America owed it to drive out invaders and honor its pledge. When MacArthur evacuated the Philippines in March 1942, he famously vowed, "I shall return." Now was his moment. Beyond public reasons, MacArthur had personal motives too. Actually, the main reason he opposed the Navy's plan was that he wanted to be the star himself. From the outbreak of the Pacific War, through the Battle of Midway, the Guadalcanal Campaign, to the bloody battles for Saipan and Guam, the Navy had always led, with the Army in support. This deeply frustrated the spotlight-loving MacArthur. If they continued attacking Pacific Islands, the Navy would still dominate the war. And so the Navy, conversely, attacking the 300,000 square kilometer Philippines required Army leadership. MacArthur's scheme didn't fool the Navy. Both sides dug in, deadlocked. So in July 1944, President Roosevelt personally went to Hawaii to meet top Army and Navy commanders. Ultimately, they compromised. First, the Navy would help the Army liberate the Philippines. Then the Army would assist the Navy in taking Iwo Jima and Okinawa, finally besieging mainland Japan while awaiting opportunities. Truthfully, the Navy's plan made more military sense.
By summer 1944, Japan's naval and air forces were crippled. America could strike anywhere freely. In that context, seizing nearby islands to besiege Japan was optimal.
In the Philippines, Japan's main forces posed no real threat. They'd be sitting ducks. Then America could liberate it at lower cost. So why did Roosevelt grant MacArthur's demand? The answer remained politics. Roosevelt had decided to run again. Winning would make him America's first four-term president, unprecedented in history.
So even this highly respected statesman sparked fierce debate.
Mainstream U.S. media overwhelmingly accused him of undermining democracy by running again, calling him practically a dictator. For Roosevelt, liberating the Philippines and establishing its democracy was the ultimate rebuttal to critics. Thus, war always bends to realpolitik. After the Hawaii meeting, the Joint Chiefs ordered the Philippines campaign to begin October 20th, 1944. If you thought the Army and Navy would reconcile and cooperate fully, you'd be wrong. The Navy resented playing second fiddle, especially to MacArthur's command. So Nimitz specifically planned the Peleliu landing operation, launching it before the Philippines campaign. Peleliu's in the central western Pacific, originally barren, but Japan built an airstrip there. Theoretically, their planes could bomb Saipan and Guam northeast, also threatening the Philippines west and New Guinea south. That's why Nimitz decided to take it. But Japan's naval air power was already crippled. How much threat could tiny Peleliu really pose? Nimitz's real goal was deploying Marines here to avoid placing them under MacArthur's command. So the Pacific War's final phase began gradually with the Battle of Peleliu. The fighting force was the 1st Marine Division, the old breed. About a third of its soldiers had fought at Guadalcanal with rich amphibious experience. The Navy prepared thoroughly. Early September 15, 1944, battleships and cruisers roared, dumping 1,400 tons of shells on Peleliu in hours. The whole island was engulfed in smoke and fire. Witnessing this, the Marines thought nothing could survive there. At 8:30 a.m., the attack order came. Amphibious vehicles packed with soldiers charged toward the beach. Nearing shore, suddenly Japanese mortar shells rained around them, throwing up huge water columns. Sunlight turned these sprays into rainbows, briefly making soldiers hallucinate. Core Japanese aim caused little damage, but proved they were alive and combat-ready. Sure enough, when Marines hit the sand, they faced disaster, an exposed killing field. Japanese hidden in coconut groves unleashed rifles, machine guns, and artillery. Marines fell everywhere. Survivors charged into the trees, cutting through barbed wire, crawling over anti-tank ditches, destroying hidden positions one by one. Casualties mounted horrifically. Survivors recalled the beach pocked with craters holding wounded men. Cries for medics echoed constantly, but there weren't enough, and snipers targeted them. Some wounded died struggling. Day 1 statistics: 1,111 Marine casualties, 219 dead. Brutality matching the Battle of Saipan. Later, U.S. forces realized The troops defending Peleliu were the elite 14th Division Regiment, about 11,000 men transferred from northeast China. Colonel Kunio Nakagawa knew a head-on fight was hopeless. He could only rely on the unique terrain. Peleliu Island's central mountains had caves scattered everywhere, forming natural hideouts.
Caves were connected by tunnels, letting defenders support each other. If one cave fell, sealing the tunnel isolated it quick.
This meant U.S. forces had to capture each cave one by one.
So, how many caves were there on the whole island? Over 500. Worse for attackers, Peleliu's rocky ground made digging foxholes or finding cover impossible. It was midsummer, toms often over 43 degrees Celsius. Marines got dizzy from heat, plus constant Japanese gunfire kept them on edge and exhausted. All this upped the casualty rate. By day 8, the 1st Marine Regiment had 56% casualties, with the 1st Battalion at 71%, super rare in U.S. military history. Though that regiment fought like mad, it was pulled out. A reserve regiment from the 81st Infantry Division took over. The battle was so tough, the Navy had to ask Army for help. The Army had no better options. They could only inch forward bit by bit. Luckily, U.S. firepower superiority squeezed Japanese zones, but new problems popped up. With more dead bodies piling up, unburied corpses rotted fast in the heat, stinking bad and growing blue-green mold. Huge flies buzzed into soldiers' food cans and mess kits. Couldn't shoo 'em away, and a plague felt imminent.
U.S. Department of Agriculture experts rushed in, formed 300 disinfection teams to spray pesticides island-wide. They got it under control, but fighting progress stayed super slow.
U.S. forces had to admit this battle couldn't be rushed.
U.S. forces mapped the whole battlefield, marked every cave with Japanese troops, then blasted them with heavy howitzers till entrances collapsed.
So, U.S. forces advanced 5 to 10 meters daily, slowly chipping away at Japanese positions. By late November, the battle had dragged on over a month, with fewer than 100 Japanese soldiers left. Colonel Kunio Nakagawa died in battle. U.S. declared the Battle of Peleliu over, but scattered fighting kept going for ages. At this point, U.S. forces in the Philippines had launched their offensive, fulfilling Nimitz's wish not to hand the Marines over to MacArthur. But the cost was the 1st Marine Division, with 1,300 dead and 6,400 wounded, plus Army losses in Peleliu, totaling over 10,000 U.S. casualties and a near 1-to-1 loss ratio with the Japanese. The author notes this casualty ratio between U.S. and Japan hasn't been seen since the Battle of Midway, showing the Japanese made a major tactical shift. Before, whether at Guadalcanal, Saipan, or Guam, Japanese forces often charged, shouting, "Banzai for the Emperor," glorifying it as the Banzai Charge. They tried to overwhelm U.S. forces with fearless spirit. But against U.S. firepower, it was just suicide.
In the Battle of Peleliu, the Japanese ditched the Banzai Charge and instead relied on fortifications and stubborn resistance, frustrating U.S. forces repeatedly.
It proves the enemy's getting harder to handle. For the U.S. to win, they gotta endure tougher fights and suffer more casualties than expected. Internal U.S. debates will escalate, climaxing in the Battle of Leyte. That's the core of Part 2, the mixed legacy, brilliance and failure in the Battle of Leyte Gulf. After the Hawaii meeting, MacArthur started prepping to attack the Philippines. Well,
He planned to first capture Leyte Island in central Philippines, then march north to take Manila.
so Leyte Island became the first U.S. target. To support the landing, Admiral Halsey led the 3rd Fleet on raids, hitting Japanese air power on nearby islands for 6 weeks. The 3rd Fleet destroyed 1,200 Japanese planes, paralyzing all nearby airfields, securing U.S. air supremacy. Meanwhile, the Japanese Navy hid in bases, and Halsey figured they'd lost the guts to attack, posing no threat. At 10 a.m. on October 21st, 1944, U.S. forces landed on Leyte Island, setting up a beachhead in under an hour. MacArthur then inspected the island as the landing craft thudded ashore. Impatiently, MacArthur stepped into knee-deep water and waded ashore. Prepped photographers captured it all, making one of WHO's most iconic scenes. MacArthur inspected the troops and declared, "People of the Philippines, I have returned," broadcast instantly across America via radio, creating a powerful impression. That created a false impression of liberation, but in reality, a crisis was brewing. Since losing Saipan, the Japanese Navy had predicted the Philippines would be America's next target. And so they prepared 4 contingency plans for different scenarios. When the Leyte Island battle began, Japan immediately activated Plan 1. The core idea, since their combined fleet was weakened, they couldn't fight head-on. Instead, they'd use flexible tactics to surprise the Americans. Specifically, the remaining 4 carriers led by Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa formed the Ozawa Fleet. Ozawa sailed from mainland Japan north toward Leyte, but he was just bait, aiming to lure away the Third Fleet's carriers and weaken Leyte Gulf's defenses. Meanwhile, Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita would lead another fleet through the Philippines straight to Leyte Gulf. Kurita's fleet held most of Japan's heavy warships, including 2 super battleships, Yamato and Musashi. They'd attack the transport ships and landing craft in the Gulf once U.S. carriers left. But would the Americans take the bait? Early signs suggested Japan's dream might shatter. Around Leyte Gulf, U.S. forces had air patrols, submarines below, patrolling ships, and land radar. Japan couldn't ensure stealth. Indeed, Halsey soon saw through the ruse. He ordered to intercept Kurita first. On October 23rd, Kurita's flagship was sunk by U.S. subs. Next afternoon, Musashi faced 100 U.S. warplanes, took heavy damage, and sank that night. Kurita was forced to withdraw his fleet to a safer harbor. This move proved deceptive. Halsey judged Kurita's fleet combat ineffective and turned attention north to Ozawa's fleet. On October 24th evening, Halsey ordered the entire Third Fleet, including 17 carriers, north, leaving Leyte Gulf to the 7th Fleet's escort carrier group. Why did Halsey mobilize so overwhelmingly? It related to his personal obsession. As a decorated, flamboyant 4-star admiral, Halsey enjoyed high prestige. Oddly, though, during carrier battles like Midway or Philippine Sea, he'd been sick, rotated out, or missed them, still lacking a carrier sink under his command. This time, hearing the Ozawa fleet had carriers, Japan's last remaining ones, Halsey felt blood rush to his head. He'd seized this chance to make up for past regrets. As they say, impulse is the devil. Dead right for Halsey. Kurita's fleet actually still packed a punch? He still had 20 or more warships, including the super battleship Yamato. Kurita had been biding his time. Halsey, pulling the whole Third Fleet out, handed him the opportunity. Right after Halsey left, Kurita's fleet sailed through narrow Philippine channels under night cover, creeping toward Leyte Gulf. At 600 a.m. on October 25th, Kurita's fleet suddenly appeared before U.S. escort carriers, half the size of regular carriers, 1/3 the tonnage, carrying just 30 planes. They mainly protected transport ships, supported landings, and resupplied regular carriers. The 7th Fleet's group had 16 escort carriers and 22 destroyers, a prime target for Kurita. Overjoyed, Kurita ordered a full assault. Yamato fired first from 32 kilometers away, 3 salvos totaling 18 armor-piercing shells. 50 seconds later, they exploded near escort carrier White Plains, throwing up 20-story water columns. Blast waves tore steel below the waterline, warping decks and compartments. Fuel leaked. Power failed. White Plains was instantly crippled. Sailors eating breakfast finally realized they were under attack. Alarms sounded, planes scrambled, but escort carriers had few aircraft, mostly for air or defense. No torpedoes, limited ammo. Pilots could only strafe while opening bomb bays to fake torpedo runs, hoping Japanese evasive maneuvers would slow them down, buying escape time. U.S. destroyers showed incredible courage, too, charging to intercept. Johnston even torpedoed a Japanese cruiser, knocking it out. But destroyers couldn't withstand prolonged battleship or cruiser assaults. At 7:25 a.m., 3 Yamato shells pierced Johnston's main deck, blowing up a boiler. The cabin instantly filled with scalding steam. Many were boiled alive. Seconds later, Yamato hit Johnston again. Captain Evans lost 2 fingers but refused retreat, telling medics, "Don't bother me now." Evans bandaged his hand with a handkerchief and kept commanding. The escort carrier commander frantically radioed Halsey for help. He also copied the message to Halsey's boss, Pacific Commander Nimitz, a breach of protocol, but the emergency overrode procedure. Nimitz rarely interfered with frontline commanders. This time he couldn't stay put, wiring Halsey directly. "Where are you? Repeat, where are you?" "No need to ask. Halsey was attacking the Ozawa fleet." By October 25th morning, he'd sunk all 4 remaining Japanese carriers, including Pearl Harbor veteran Zuikaku. Japan now had no active carriers left, seemingly a huge Halsey victory. But this came at the cost of endangering allies beyond the battered escort carriers. If Japan hit Leyte Gulf's transport ships and supply depots, U.S. logistics would collapse. If Japanese shelled landing troops, massive casualties would slow retaking the Philippines. Halsey nearly caused disaster, prioritizing personal glory over strategy. Why nearly? Because the worst didn't happen. Kurida's fleet suddenly withdrew despite overwhelming advantage, sparking huge debate in Japan. Many accused Kurita of cowardice. He was stripped of command. But Kurita had his reasons. First, U.S. destroyers' fierce resistance caused losses and scattered his formation. Total victory wasn't guaranteed. More importantly, Kurita wanted to preserve his fleet. Wiping out current forces and sweeping Leyte Gulf would take time. If Halsey doubled back then, his whole fleet would be annihilated. Kurita's withdrawal saved the escort carriers and salvaged Halsey's reputation. Halsey could now boast about his dazzling success. Final toll. USA lost 1 light carrier, 2 escort carriers, 2 destroyers. Japan lost 4 carriers, 3 battleships, 10 cruisers, 12 destroyers. Casualty ratio, 1 to 5.8, total U.S. victory. Media painted Halsey as America's darling hero, but only the military knew how close disaster was. Nimitz almost removed him, but had 2 concerns. First, Halsey was the Navy's only commander whose public influence rivaled MacArthur's. Nimitz couldn't bear to lose him. Second, the election was heating up. Punishing Halsey would let opponents stir political chaos. So after deliberation, Nimitz dropped the idea. Regardless, Leyte Gulf marked the end of major Pacific naval battles. No more large-scale clashes, now the Army would take center stage. Part 3. Bitter Victory. Capturing Manila, liberating the Philippines. Let's examine the U.S. Army's performance. During Leyte Gulf, ground forces advanced steadily too. After brutal combat, they crushed Japan's oldest, best-equipped elite, the 1st Division. On December 15, 1944, MacArthur declared organized resistance on Leyte extinct.
Sobering numbers. Sobering, 11,000 plus U.S. casualties versus 60,000 plus Japanese losses.
Despite U.S. dominance, Japan wouldn't abandon the Philippines easily, contrary to MacArthur's belief. Now, U.S. forces targeted Luzon, the Philippines' largest island, where capital Manila lies in the south. The battle's political significance was obvious. At 9:30 a.m., January 9, 1945, U.S. troops landed at Lingayen Gulf. Over 20,000 got ashore in 10 minutes. By noon, they secured a 30-kilometer-long, 19-kilometer-wide beachhead. Heavy equipment piled everywhere. Japan offered only token resistance. Plus, U.S. Navy cut supply lines to Japan. This made MacArthur smug again. See? The Philippines aren't hard to take, but this was Japanese commander Yamashita's plan all along. Tomoyuki Yamashita, a Japanese army general, when war broke out, he swept through Malaya, forced Britain's Singapore surrender, hailed as Tiger of Malaya. Japan's high command sent him to defend Luzon, counting on this tiger to roar again. Yamashita split his 270,000 troops into 2 groups. 150,000 deployed in Lingayen Gulf's northwestern mountains under his command, and 120,000 guarding Manila's outskirts. Separated by distance, they fought independently. And Japanese forces wouldn't fight on beaches or plains to avoid overwhelming U.S. air-sea firepower. Yamashita essentially abandoned mobility for static defense, a desperate move. With Japan's forces unable to hold, Yamashita could only bleed the Americans and slow their advance, a tactic that worked. As U.S. forces pushed deeper, resistance grew, especially in mountains where Japanese crossfire traps waited.
U.S. troops had to inch forward under fire, clearing bunkers and tunnels one by one.
MacArthur grew impatient.
He ordered partial forces to clear northeast Lingayen, while the main army raced south to capture Manila.
His order to 6th Army Commander Walter Kruger was just 3 words. Fast! 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 MacArthur's rush had reasons. Intelligence showed thousands of Allied POWs near Manila, many starving, were his former men. He felt responsible. He also wanted to seize Manila, lightning fast, and hand it intact to Filipinos. So he forbade airstrikes or heavy artillery during the assault. He even hoped Japan would declare Manila an open city to spare this historic Southeast Asian gem, like he'd done when retreating. But militarist brainwashed Japanese weren't that merciful. Instead, facing defeat, Japan chose madness, unleashing the infamous Manila Massacre. On February 3rd, 1945, as U.S. forces breached Manila's defenses, Japanese troops torched shops and homes, engulfing the city in flames. The U.S. 14 Corps reported, "Smoke so thick, burning buildings radiated blistering heat waves." We couldn't advance. Refugees swarmed toward us. They were covered in ash, many already homeless and broken. They were relatively lucky.
As street fighting progressed, U.S. troops often found civilian corpses. Some infants had been brutally beheaded, clear evidence of organized massacre.
Post-war, Allied forces discovered orders from Major General Sanji Iwabuchi in captured documents. Destroy all usable facilities. Ports, warehouses, factories, fuel tanks, power stations, and kill everyone non-Japanese, soldiers or civilians. Use bayonets on civilians to save ammunition. Violence began as troops looted, raped, and burned. Manila became hell on earth. Hundreds were herded into Santo Tomas Church. Drunk soldiers bayoneted men, dragged women aside to assault them, bodies piled on steps, blood flowing like rivers.
At Philippine General Hospital, holding 7,000 civilians, Japanese dragged out girls at night with flashlights for gang rape. Even during U.S. assaults when walls collapsed, atrocities continued. German Axis citizens weren't spared. To the Japanese, all Westerners, high-nosed, pale-skinned, deserved death. Witnessing this, horrified U.S. troops defied MacArthur, using heavy artillery.
At 7:30 a.m., February 23rd, U.S. forces concentrated 101 5mm and 155mm howitzers. They fired 7,896 high-explosive shells in 1 hour, the Pacific War's densest barrage. Manila's oldest district, the Spanish-built 16th-century Intramuros, vanished instantly, a New York Times reporter described. Giant black smoke columns, raining debris and shrapnel, air thick with dust. The ancient city disappeared. Only artillery flashes remained visible. At dawn on February 26th, Manila's commander Sanji Iwabuchi committed suicide. U.S. declared the Philippines liberated, but Yamashita's forces held out until Japan's surrender in August 1945, only then laying down arms. The Philippines was reborn. But most of Manila lay in ruins with 100,000 civilians dead. At this stage, U.S. troops felt profound dismay. The planned victory parade was canceled. On February 27th, U.S. forces held a ceremony at Malacanang Palace, east of Manila, declaring the Philippine Autonomous Government would assume all powers and gain formal independence next year. Next, MacArthur delivered a speech. He lamented, "Most of what I wish to preserve has been destroyed." After speaking, MacArthur choked with tears and had to withdraw early. Meanwhile, American journalists and Filipinos began collecting evidence of the Manila Massacre atrocities. Sober judicial conclusion. Japanese war crimes were prosecuted. Philippines commander Tomoyuki Yamashita received the death penalty. From September 1944 to February 1945, U.S. forces crippled Japan's navy, liberated the Philippines, and exposed Japan's homeland to direct attack. Of course, senior U.S. commander's performance wasn't flawless. Their pre-battle decisions and battlefield commands weren't always military-based, often swayed by politics or personal biases.
For example, Nimitz launched the Pelolio campaign to keep the 1st Marine Division from army control, resulting in massive casualties.
Halsey prioritized personal glory over allies' safety at Leyte Gulf, nearly causing disaster.
MacArthur severely underestimated Japanese numbers and resolve in the Philippines, all forcing unnecessary U.S. sacrifices.
That said, despite higher losses, Japan never had a chance to turn the tide, not even momentarily.
The reason: U.S. supremacy in war production, weapons development, logistics, recruitment, and training.
So even when America erred, its overwhelming power crushed the enemy. War ultimately tests a nation's comprehensive strength.
Japan's defeat was inevitable.
Now, with the Philippines liberated, U.S. forces target Japan's last strongholds, Iwo Jima and Okinawa. Militarism's fall is just a matter of time. I'll cover this in the next episode of Twilight of the Gods. From Leyte Gulf to Japan's surrender, 1944 to 1945. That concludes part 1. Reading notes are below the audio. See you next time.